Hi friends, welcome back. We are going to keep reading The Outcasts of 19 Schuyler Place by E.L. Coningsburg. Remember, I don't own the copyright to this book. We're just reading it out loud together for educational purposes. So the last time we read, Margaret had been sent to the juvenile detention center, and Jake had gotten together the Meadowlark girls and gotten permission from Mrs. Kaplan and is bringing them to the towers to do something. So I guess we will find out. But we are going to pick back up with the section called Phase 1, Part B, and Phases 2 and 3. Chapter 26. Even though I was back in my own genuine French provincial-style bed, I was once again convinced that I had not slept a wink until the sound of voices coming from outside awakened me. Before getting out of bed to investigate the voices, which in my half-awakened state I believed to be the men coming back, I studied the unfinished rows on the ceiling of my room. I wondered if Jake would finish it, or even try to, if the towers were no longer here to interest him. I glanced at the clock. It was only 6:30. I guessed that the workmen wanted to get an early start, since they had been unable to get any real work done the day before. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and twisted my head from side to side to loosen the crook in my neck. The voices were quiet now, and I wondered whether or not I had really heard them, so I went to the window to look out. And I saw the most remarkable sight. Alicia Silver, Blair Patiani, Ashley Schwartz, Caitlin Lorenzo, Stacy Muganis, and Heather Featherstone filed out of the yellow camp bus and stopped by the back gate. Each of them spoke briefly to Jake and then followed his pointing hand to a place on one of the towers. Berkeley Sims was the last through the gate. She headed toward Tower 2, and only seconds later I saw her head and shoulders appear at my window. She saw me too. She smiled and waved just before her head and shoulders disappeared from the window, and in quick succession her waist, stomach, legs, and feet appeared and just as quickly disappeared. She passed my platform and continued to climb, and finally she sat down on the narrowest rung, just below the clock faces and well above the roof of the house. I had to open the window, lean out, and twist my head to see her. I turned away from the window to call my uncles, but quickly turned back when I heard a squeal of the bus door. I could hardly believe my eyes. Climbing down the steps of the bus was no less a person than herself, Mrs. Tilly Kaplan, owner and director of Camp Tahlequah. She reached back into the bus and removed 2 six-packs of bottled water. Even from the distance of my bedroom window, I recognized the Evian label. Designer water! From Mrs. Kaplan! Mrs. Kaplan said something to Jake that I could not hear. I saw Jake nod, listen, nod again, and then he pointed at me and waved. I jumped back into the side, out of his line of sight, and called to my uncles. They were at my side in a heartbeat, took one quick look, and started down the steps with Tartufo hard on their heels. The 3 of us made it to the edge of the service porch when we heard Jake roar, "Stop! Don't take another step!" We stopped on command. Jake shouted, "Don't come here. The court has issued an injunction. You are not allowed in here. Don't risk it. If you try to stop the demolition now, you will be held in contempt of court. Don't tempt them into arresting you." He stopped, smiled directly at me, and added, "Arrest you again." Mrs. Kaplan stepped forward. "We have a plan," she said. Uncle Alex asked, "We?" Mrs. Kaplan nodded, then swept her hand in the direction of the girls sitting in the towers. 3 of them waved and greeted me with, "Hi, Margaret." Uncle Morris asked Mrs. Kaplan, "And who, may I ask, are you?" "I am the director," she replied. "Director? Of what?" Any one of us could have answered that question, but not one of us got the chance to, for we heard the back gate swing open as Tony came into the tower garden, and Tartufo, paying no attention to court orders, lunged at Tony, and Tony yelled at me, "Leash that animal!" I replied, "I'm not allowed to set foot in the yard. It's the law." Jake said, "That's probably the piece of paper you have in your hand." Tartufo came to Jake's side, stopped briefly, then, with his eyes and ears forward and his tail skyward, he took a stately walk toward the rear gate, where he lifted his leg and peed. From their positions in towers 1, 2, and 3, the Meadowlarks laughed. Tony looked from tower to tower, shielding his eyes with his hand, until he spotted Berkeley Sims perched high on Tower 2. She waved. He spun around and shook a fist at her. "You come down here this minute!" he yelled. Berkeley said, "I prefer not to." Tony spun around again and waved his fist in all directions and hollered, "All of you! You cocky little she-brats! All of you! Come down here this minute!" And in a chorus that was music to my ears, they said, "We prefer not to." And then they said it again. "We prefer not to." They said it again and again. And I understood that "we," and I loved it. The Meadowlarks perched in the towers caused hours of delay, and those cocky little she-brats stopped the demolition. Chapter 27. Late on the previous afternoon, 2 local television stations and the Epiphany Times had gotten heads-up calls there might be an interruption to the demolition of the towers at 19 Schuyler Place in Old Town. The newspaper assigned a reporter and a photographer to cover the story the next morning. Channel 3's Eyewitness News team sent Holly Blackwell, their newest on-the-scene reporter, who sensed a career opportunity. On Friday, as soon as a television van appeared in front of 19 Schuyler Place, so did a crowd. No one knew where the people came from, for ever since the Greater Comprehensive Redevelopment Plan had designated Schuyler Place as part of Old Town, the streets has been as quiet and dignified as the Royal Court of England. But television cameras find people, or people find them. Either way, the street was jammed with young and old who wanted to wave at the camera. Others worked their way to the front of the line so that Holly could hold the microphone under their chins as they expressed their newly formed but deeply felt opinions of the towers and their fate. When monitors at the Channel 5 studio showed that Channel 3's van was When monitors at the Channel 5 studio showed that Channel 3's van was creating as well as capturing the breaking story, the program director at First News sent a mobile unit and 2 reporters to the scene. Jake made a hurried call to Peter Vanderwall and suggested that he call Loretta Bevilacqua to find out if, with her New York connections, she could parlay in-depth coverage from 2 local stations into coverage on at least one national all-news station. Peter called, and after twice reminding him that she, Loretta Bevilacqua, did not micromanage, she promised to see what she could do. All day Friday and into the night until the sun came up on Saturday, there were never fewer than 6 Meadowlarks up in the towers and never fewer than 2 cameras on them. Mrs. Kaplan desperately wanted it over with. She wanted her campers back in camp. She needed them there. Sunday was parent visiting day, and she was terrified that the Meadowlark parents would show up and their daughters would not. And neither would she. Saturday, being a slow news day, the story of the sit-in at the towers got hot and hotter. The fact that not much was happening elsewhere, plus the novelty of the situation in Epiphany, human interest, organized protest, local empowerment, outsider art, gave the national media enough to feed on. They came. Peter Vanderwall presented himself as an authority, which he certainly was, on outsider art, and he was interviewed by one of the national weekend anchors. He sat at the uncle's old kitchen table and held up a sheaf of papers that he said were letters of support from art authorities, near and far. Never mind that, at the moment, all the letters had been written, but only half of them have actually been signed. He waved the papers, flashed his smile and his diamond earring, and declared, "From Clarion State University, right here at Epiphany, New York, to the Huntington Library art collections and botanical gardens in California, these towers are being called everything from a national treasure to a historical landmark. To call them masterpieces of outsider art would be an understatement." Holly Blackwell wanted in-depth coverage, as she called it, so she interviewed Mrs. Kaplan at length. She asked her what she regarded as her responsibilities toward the girls' safety versus her commitment to the towers. Mrs. Kaplan answered, "The safety of our Camp Tahlequah girls is always foremost in our minds. We consider this activity an urban, outward-bound type learning experience. By halting the destruction of one of our nation's artistic treasures, this excursion is an experience in social responsibility as well. We teach both art and social responsibility at Camp Tahlequah. With the limited means we have at our disposal, we have dedicated ourselves to safeguarding these towers." It was sweeps week for the towers. By the end of Saturday, suburban people who had never seen the towers, never even known of their existence, had an opinion about them. "Defy and Occupy" was the next day's headline at the Epiphany Times, and because it was a slow news day, the paper published the entire text of Uncle Alex's appeal to the city council. People magazine sent a photographer who took pictures of the girls in the towers and told Mrs. Kaplan that the magazine would run the story in the following week under the heading, "Outward and Upward Bound for Art." Mrs. Kaplan posed at the base of Tower 3 with 2 of the girls, Heather and Berkeley, visible. She smiled at the camera and for the cameraman. Jake's picture was not there at all. Neither was mine or the uncle's. CNBS, the national all-news cable channel, put Peter's interview on what they call a loop, so that once every 2 hours he got prime-time coverage. Of course, he was convincing. And adorable. In the week that followed, he got 3 marriage proposals and inquiries about job possibilities from 14 recent art history graduates. He loved all the fame and fortune, except for the marriage proposals. They depressed him. Ever on the lookout for a way to out-broadcast the national broadcasters and to keep the story going, Holly Blackwell pursued City Hall for background on the story. Her many attempts to reach the mayor were unsuccessful. He was in South Carolina, attending a national mayoral conference at the Hilton Head Golf and Country Club, and was unavailable. His spokesperson said that the mayor would not have a statement until Monday, and of course there would be no demolition until he returned and had an opportunity to review both sides of the issue. And that was time enough to stall. and time enough for the Meadowlarks to get back to Tahlequah for visiting day. And that was phase 2. That's where we're going to leave it for today. Tomorrow, we are going to finish this book up, and we're going to find out what happens to the towers in the end. See you guys then.